Alright, so today we are going to be doing something quite a bit different than what we've done before. This is going to be my first stream on my Ideas channel / also on the Twitch. We are going to be taking a look through the book I wrote, which I wrote kind of during the early portion of the pandemic, like in 2020, because I didn't know what to do with my time, so I wrote a book. This is easily the longest thing I've ever written. It is not in a fully complete state. It's about 70,000 words. When reading about how to publish a nonfiction book, I read that the strategy is, generally speaking, you want to get an agent to pick up the book, and you want to do that actually before you write the book. And so I have this hunk of mostly written, still some of it is in the later periods of book, or in the earlier, so the later portions of the book are kind of in the earlier stages of writing, but we have this book that I wrote, and the book's topic is agency. Specifically, the interplay between one's own attention and agency. And the central thesis is that we are able to control our own actions and generate, any sort of agency in the world and move through the world in more efficacious ways through mastering our own attention. This is the central thesis of the book, and the book starts off mainly dealing with a more abstract philosophical sense of looking at things, and then gets into a much more concrete and psychological way of approaching stuff, eventually approaching kind of a self-helpy type of vibe at the end, but it starts off with kind of laying the foundations, although I don't like the metaphor foundations, and then proceeding from there. And so, because the central thesis being attention is really the only thing we have control of, if we have control over anything, from a philosophical standpoint, which I'm not sure how I would feel about kind of publishing a book like that now. And in fact, I think that a lot of this is going to be me kind of having problems with some of the things I've written, generally agreeing with a lot of it. And so we're going to be reading through this, which is the introduction to the book. It's about 9 pages, double-spaced in what is this, Microsoft, or not Microsoft Word, this is in the Google Doc, and I could already see something that I would probably change, which is, I don't think I would use a Marx quote at the beginning. I think that the Marx quote would be a little bit too inflammatory to use at the beginning, so let's get into this. So, in theory and practice are the same. In practice, they are not. And so, this is going to be a book about practice, but it starts out from a theoretical perspective, and then we have this quote: philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it, and this is more a dig at philosophy than it is like we're trying to be like Marx, but I think that I wouldn't use this quote at this point now, because I think that quoting Marx is mildly inflammatory. And it's not that the quote doesn't fit, the quote does fit. You can't just think about the world. The point is acquiring some sort of agency, and this is kind of my problem with philosophy. And I think here I imagine I will problematize philosophy a little bit more than I otherwise would in the past, more than I would in the past. I think or more than I do now. That's the one. But I think that in a lot of philosophy, you're not doing anything that's functionally useful, and the point is to change it. But I think that now Marx has a lot of implications behind him, and this would be implying some sort of social change, when in fact the book is really dealing with the individual at the individual level, and this is really what you're taking a look at, because that's what you have control over, and it actually leans a lot on Stoic ways of thinking. And so a quote from a Stoic would probably be more appropriate here than this, but I think that what I'm going to do in this introduction is be ripping on philosophy a little bit for failing to provide practical solutions to things, and so let's jump into it. If you've ever ordered some furniture from IKEA, you have a good understanding of the meaning of assembly required. You get what you pay for, or in this case, what you didn't pay for. IKEA, by deferring the task of assembly, I don't know if I like the word deferring, the task of assembly onto the consumer, as well as the disassembled product being easier to ship, is able to provide the same quality furniture for a lot less. But assembly is required. Let's just put that in. You have to put in some effort in order to get your cheaper furniture, so you're still paying just with something else. One of the metaphors I'm going to use in this book is that attention is a form of currency that we spend, and so yeah. In this case, your labor. Fortunately, IKEA provides tools, as frustrating as they might be, for assembly as well as the parts. Anyone who's put together something from IKEA knows, like, using the like little hex thing is just like the hex thing that you like twist to assemble is a bit rough. When I was first collecting notes for this book, I was intending to make it purely theoretical. I had a vague image in my mind of a mental model for agency and how attention was at the root of action. A theory about action, a theory about practice. I very quickly realized that a theory alone would be insufficient for conveying ideas about action, at least if the communication of the theory was to be in the spirit of the theory. I don't mind this sentence. It's a little long. At least if the communication of the theory was to be in the spirit of the theory, which is that if we're talking about action, we actually have to be providing actionable types of ideas and steps and this sort of thing. My putting forth a theory about action that didn't involve action itself would be like a hairdresser putting forth their child with a bad haircut. I could do it, certainly, but somehow it seemed both in bad faith and bad taste. Beyond that, it isn't at all unreasonable to expect that one picking up a book on agency is more interested in, practically speaking, increasing their agency. So we arrive at a juncture where it is reasonable to think that a theory about action ought to involve some action. In some sense, the theory is incomplete without performance of the action. And I've grown to view this a lot more, as I've thought more about the presentation of ideas being an essential element of the ideas. And you're always, whenever you're looking at an idea, you're always looking at it through some sort of perspective, right? You don't experience ideas devoid of any sort of context, and so it's like you're looking through a lens, and that lens is always going to color your perspective of the idea in a really substantive way. And one of the ways in which a lens is kind of colored is if something seems abstract and theoretical versus something that seems practical and concrete. And often, the best way to convey an idea is through the performance of that idea. And so, for example, if you have someone who's teaching you how to like lose weight, for example, and they're really overweight, it's not quite the same. But if they show like themselves, if they're teaching you about like losing weight, right? And I'm saying this now because I'm trying to cut right now a little bit. If they have like on the wall a picture of them being huge and then a picture of them much smaller, then they performatively like are embodying their theoretical practice. Now this doesn't affect the truth value of what information they're giving you. They could be giving you the best information possible, but the presentation, performance of the ideas is like an important element. Hey Richard, how's it going? Good evening. Good morning. Good morning for me. So the focus of the book shifted to one of both theory and practice. In this book, assembly will be required. And so I'm saying that in the book, I can't just have a disembodied theoretical sort of thing about agency, although that will be the earlier portion of the book is more theoretical, and then the later has got to be more practical. The central thesis of the book is that we can create action through our attention, and that is fundamentally how action is created. Let's italicize that. But, just like assembling IKEA furniture, it takes a few steps. This book lays out several tools in the form of mental exercises to organize this process. If we only attend to the theory of agency, and not the practice, then the result will be an unassembled product. For IKEA furniture, you pay with your labor. For agency, we're going to switch to the English spelling of labor. For agency, you pay with the assembly with your attention. Agency is not so easily purchased that one can afford to pay attention only to the theory with the expectation that that sort of investment will yield fruit. Again, the metaphor of attention is our currency, and the most valuable currency we have. One must also pay attention to their practice. To extend this metaphor, reading this book with just the theory in mind would be a little like ordering a coffee table from IKEA, leaving it in the box, and then using that box as a coffee table. Perhaps there is some sort of legitimate subversive artistic expression as a reason for doing this, but desires to emulate Banksy aside, I love this sentence so much when I section so much when I wrote it. But desires to emulate Banksy aside, who may very well scorn the emulation, leaving the coffee table in the box seems a little absurd. If not because you are, if not because you aren't engaging in assembly, then here, we're going to highlight this because this probably... If not because you aren't engaging in assembly, then because you ordered a coffee table in particular. Do we have a problem with this sentence? I think it's kind of poorly written. Perhaps a box of packing peanuts would have been more subversive. That's true. Ba-boom. This is a book about agency. Here. We're going to highlight this as a note to ourselves that we maybe want to change the sentence. This is a book about agency. If the goal is pure entertainment and joy of reading, rather than some utility, then it's unlikely that this is the best choice. If you don't open the box and assemble it, then it's irrelevant what's in the box. That is, if you read theories about action, but never put those theories into action, then they won't be useful, no matter how accurate. So, how do we decide what we should be doing? And here we're going to have probably an inappropriate aside to philosophy, which is we're going to talk about theory and action. The philosopher David Hume made a distinction about how one cannot derive an ought from an is. Just because we are able to describe the world, how the world is, doesn't mean we can know what we should do about it. And this is something that is really common in philosophy, but I think is lost a little bit in like the normal in other spheres of the humanities, at least academically, which is that, you know, there's often an implication about what we should do about something that follows like our description of the world in a particular way. Often we just like emphatically say that something bad is happening, and the tone implies that we should do something about it. But you can't derive any sort of prescriptive theory about what's good from, you know, just describing how the world is. His point was largely that as soon as we began to add oughts to our analysis becomes subjective, right? Informed by a sort of value system, informed by our values rather than some sort of purely rational abstract analysis. Which means, for us, if we want to incorporate our practice into our theory of agency and offer prescriptions, then our theory will necessarily become subjective in some sense. But the subjectivity will be relative to each individual. It will be based on your values. This is significant because a theory of agency would typically fall into the domain of academic philosophy. And academic philosophy generally goes out of its way to avoid subjectivity at all costs. I don't know if I kind of soft agree with this, but I don't know if I hard agree with this as much as I did when I wrote it. Subjectivity could be regarded as, let's say, unclean. From a philosophical perspective, by offering a prescriptive practice, we are going to step into it. That is subjectivity. Obviously implying shit, but here we are. Hopefully, we stepped not with both feet at once, nor in too much of it. To clarify, our intended footing is a little more a bit more. This bit is unnecessary. A good way to think about this book is that we will be straddling the line between a mix of science and philosophy, which offers much in the way of theory, and self-help, which offers much in the way of theory. Wait, what? This needs to be rewritten. let's do that now. Science offers much in the way of theory. Science offers much in the way of theory, and self-help offers much in the way of practice. For shoulds, we'll lean as heavily as we can on empirical evidence. Drawing from economics, psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy, and making inferences from those disciplines in regards to what sorts of self-help practices seem reasonable. But it's important to note that this sort of synthesis between theory and practice structures not only what we will be included here, but will also be omitted. We'll talk more specifically about the inclusions soon enough, but I'd like to briefly touch on some of the omissions. A more academic take on agency would have a longer and more technical discussion on free will, as well as discussing a few topics that might sound strange or off-putting to the layperson. The nature of consciousness, causation, truth theories, specifically comparing an objectivist paradigm with an experiential paradigm as it relates to agency, and a more theoretical discussion on identity. A more self-help oriented take would include a lot more in the way of anecdotal examples or testimonials, and would, generally speaking, spend more pages devoted to the task of inspiring the reader. Values, what we think of as being good, give us our odds. And this is a central element in like my philosophy and worldview, is that often you really don't know what another person should do in a given context, even if you understand the context really well, unless you know what their values are. In this book, we will see the idea that one ought to organize their values into a hierarchy. I don't know if I believe this as much, but I think this is the perspective I wrote from, so I'm not going to change this. Hierarchy is an unnecessary structure. I would say like a web now, but the idea, organizing it into a hierarchy is not terrible. In a hierarchy, in the hierarchy of values taken by discussion of the book, the highest value in our hierarchy is for this book is increasing our agency. To this end, we want to describe it well, but our value... We maybe don't want hierarchy. To this end, we want to describe agency well, but our description is a means to that end. Our model of agency is created for the purpose of informing action. Unlike academic philosophy, the description will be subservient to the prescription. And so, kind of setting things a little bit different here. With our theory, we will look at attention being the site at which we exercise real action. Our prescriptions will be to structure that attention through mental exercise done proactively. Done proactively is like... This is such a strong emphasis, and it feels so underemphasized here. Because you fundamentally, like, I guess we'll get into it, but, yeah, this is just the introduction. And then here is defining agency. Agency is the effective action in the direction of our values. It's a bit odd to use an ought there, since you had a previous quote as ought versus is. Organizing them into a hierarchy is a practical matter, not a values-based matter, right? It's odd to use ought there because you had a previous quote about ought versus is. Oh man, I don't know exactly where you're referring to. Organizing them into a hierarchy is a practical matter. One ought to organize their values in a priority manner. It's a practical matter, a values-based matter, yeah. Yeah, it is. But the idea of... this isn't a theoretical... Values, I think anything when you're dealing with values is a practical matter. Becomes a practical matter. Because there's no, like, theoretical best value. So, yeah, I think it would be a practical matter, not a values-based matter. No, everything that is values-based is practical, I would say. Right, because, unless I'm not catching what you're asking exactly. Because if we have a set of values and those values are subjective to ourselves, then it can't be any sort of like theoretical. If fulfillment of those values won't be any sort of theoretical correctness, it will be a practical correctness insofar as it's fulfilling our values. But maybe we just highlight the ought and reflect on that a little bit more later. I was thinking where values come from. Yeah, so the where the values come from is outside the scope of this book. I think the idea is that everyone has values, and those values are different, and that what you should do is contingent on those values. Because I think in theory you should try and fulfill your values, but your values are going to be different than my values, right? And so that means the actions that are good are going to be different than mine. Okay, so this is the definition I give for agency, which I think is an oversimplification, but I think I say it is. Agency is effective action in the direction of our values. This is the definition for agency we will be using in the book. It goes a little further than a more philosophically technical definition, one that would omit both efficiency, efficacy, and values. So, the inclusion of both efficacy and values would definitely not would not be in philosophy. It would just be action. Keeping only volitional control so that in a sense we are already adding a practice to our theory, which is that we are adding practice to our definition. The addition of both efficacy and direction towards values in this discussion for creating action comes from two fairly conservative assumptions about how we, as agents, will want to increase our agency. First is that we will want our actions to be effective at producing desired results that first motivated them. We want our actions to produce strong results, not merely show up. Second is that the actions we create of our own volitional control will have some sort of intent or aim, and actually making progress towards that aim is preferable. Values. We want those results to be congruent with our values and not just be effective in some random direction. We will break this statement, agency is effective action in the direction of our values, into 5 conceptual blocks that are each 2 chapters. Each block will start off with a chapter that mostly highlights a problem or an impediment to agency. The second chapter in each block will present solutions to that problem. These solutions can roughly be categorized into either practical or theoretical. And so we'll first get the theory and then we'll get the practice in 5 blocks, with a general trend to being more practice-oriented throughout the book. The theory will offer a set of ideas or models for thinking about things that is conducive to a greater agency. Are conducive, sure, as we have defined it, and the practical solution will offer a prescription in terms of these actions. These actions will be largely internal in the form of mental exercise, which can loosely be described as a structured form of introspection. Let's take a brief look at the content of these blocks. Block 1, defining agency. Agency is, and the problem here is attention. The ability to continue attending to something is the site at which we exercise our control. Our problem is that attention is a finite resource, and external forces place demands on that finite resource. If there was an area of the book for me to expand, it would probably be this in the past several years. But the best example of stuff that seizes on our agency would be like social media, which is designed to increase engagement, and not actually fulfill our values. The reason for they're motivated to only increase engagement and not fulfill values because they generate revenue based on engagement. So if someone is just scrolling infinitely and just consuming more and more advertisement, that's good for them. And so a social media company that actually facilitated people meeting up and interacting, which would probably be better fulfilling our values for, socialization, this is not good for keeping you scrolling infinitely and consuming as much advertisement as possible. But, okay. Theory is neuroplasticity. With directed attention, we can change the physical structure of our brains. I don't know if I'd want to lean into this as much anymore. I think it's true, but I think that, well, I guess I would have to read what I wrote. This in turn will affect the sorts of information that enters our attention in the first place. And this is a really key idea, which is that, like, okay, you can ask someone, will you choose door number A or door number B? And they'll, like, think, and they'll be like, oh, I'll choose door number A. And then you're like, well, that's too bad because the correct answer was door number C. You can only engage in action that enters your attention as a possibility in the first place. And this is not something you have control over in a, like, real-time basis. And so part of what you are trying to do is you are trying to make it so that in the future, the sorts of actions that are more congruent with your values are actually the ones that are entering your attention. And preferably, kind of the only ones, as options. Richard says, I've long thought the ability to direct the spotlight of the world's attention is the mass media's greatest power. They kind of tell us what to care about by reporting on it. Yes. And then this in turn, like, yeah, I would agree with that. Because, like, a huge reason why, there's a thought experiment by Peter Singer, I think is the name of the philosopher, where, like, if you saw a child drowning, you're in the park, child's drowning in the lake in the park. You can save the child, but you'll ruin your $200 shoes. Do you save the child? And most everyone says, yeah, okay, I save the child. And no one else can help the child. You have to ruin your shoes. It's a thought experiment. You can't reject the thought experiment. You can't be like, oh, I would look around for a stick so that I could, save the shoes and the child. That's not allowed. That's not how thought experiments work. The choice is the child's life or $200. And Peter Singer's point is that there are tons of children all over the world with whom you could save their lives with $200 if you sent them $200 instead of getting those shoes. And that's Peter Singer's point. But those children, in the context of, like, the relevancy of this here, those children are outside of our attention. We don't think about those children, and it's very hard to ignore a child drowning in front of you. And so, same with, like, the world's issues. Like, some stuff just gets super underreported, and some stuff gets super reported on. Like, my understanding, and it's a very weak understanding because I actually haven't consumed that much media on it, is, like, Yemen, for example, has just been getting, like, war-torn for, like, the better part of 2 decades. And we get some wee-woos outside, and this doesn't get reported on. But, like, there's a lot of other stuff that is getting reported on. Also in Congo, there's, like, massive displacements, and this is, like, quite a bit of an aside, but we see most of the reporting for, like, critical, like, world events occurring right now with the Israel-Palestine conflict and also Ukraine, more so than, like, other stuff that's going on. Like, the Uyghurs, you see very little reporting on them, but what's going on there is, like, genocide. And so, yeah, this is a bit of an aside. But, like, this is a larger societal issue. So this is, like, really outside the context of the book, where the book is focusing on the individual level, because I think that if you're going to write a book on agency, you're going to focus less on societal change, I think. That would be a different type of book rather than a personal agency book. Okay, so that's the theory, neuroplasticity. The practice is mental exercise. We could use mental exercises to structure our attention and thus be intentional in regards to neuroplasticity. For the most part, this process is done proactively. Okay. And then here's direction of. And the problem here is the unknown. If we cannot paint a picture of reality and orient ourselves inside of it, then we will be too disoriented for effective action. Furthermore, the fear of the unknown can distort our perception. The theory here, that is the response to the problem, is mental models. We can think of our worldview as a map that guides us through the territory of life. For those of you who are familiar with the expression, the map is not the territory, Oh man, the guy who made that, coined that term's name is hard to say, so we'll avoid it. I think it's like Alfred Korzybski or something. He wrote Science and Sanity. Is this guy. Although I think a lot of people invoke the map is not the territory thing, and then don't really have knowledge of this guy. I'm not endorsing his ideas, but if my recollection is correct, he's the one who coined the term, the map is not the territory. But yeah. So, and then the practice here will be brainstorming. Curiosity and iconoclasm are two traits that will help us to engage in creative synthesis and the critical destruction of our maps. I think that you have to, if you want your worldview to be good, you have to at some point recognize parts of your worldview that are wrong. Or if you want your worldview to be accurate, you have to at some point recognize portions of your worldview that are incorrect. And often, this is something that is painful to do, and I think people will often avoid doing this. And so a lot of people, their worldview is literally the first ideas they encountered regarding framing or modeling a particular thing. And if you're not willing to update your worldview, then the odds that you got the exact correct worldview the first time out are incredibly low. So odds are your worldview is not that robust, I would say, or incisive, or whatever positive adjective you want to use. If it's literally just the first things you encountered on something. We get some more wee-woos outside. Through iterative process and asking questions is... through this iterative process and asking questions is one way we can make sense of the unknown. So we need to know what to shoot at. Okay. Action in the is the third block, and you see we're literally chunking this sentence into 5 blocks. Action in the problem here is helplessness, learned helplessness. The feeling that nothing we do matters is the greatest impediment to agency, stopping it entirely. This feeling is largely caused by how we explain our events to ourselves, a process over which we have control, but only if we, only if exercising this control is something that enters our awareness at the time. My favorite inner engineering for them gains, basically. My favorite is inner engineering for them gains. 100%. By the way, is the your favorite book? Nice. Is the stream is the stream still in 720? Because I changed something to try and make it not in 720, so that it could be in 1080. But I don't know if it worked or not. Okay. The theory is ecosystem. Our environment influences us largely through an effect called priming, but we also influence our environment. Our practice needs to be strategically informed by this two-way relationship. So now we're starting to get, as you can see, more and more practical as we move further and further from the start of the book. Now we're talking about changing the environment, because the environment has an effect on us. If you, on the way home, if you drive past 10 fast food places on one road, and there's no fast food places on the other, if you are to drive down the fast food road versus the other road, you'll probably be way more, or you will be way more likely to buy fast food, unless there's some other trigger on the other road that causes you to want fast food, right? Yours is at 360p? Is this a me side thing? Alright, give me a second. Okay, mine says 720 when I'm watching it myself on the Twitch. Let's check the YouTube. Sorry, guys. I thought I maybe fixed this. And then on the YouTube, if I watch it myself, I have 720 still as the max. Damn it. Okay. I wonder if I lower the speed, it would work. Or if I lower, we're gonna try something here. Or actually, we'll try that for next thing. I don't want to do it while I'm streaming, so we'll try and see if we can fix it next time. Hi, by the way. Hey, trusted Chilean writer. We're going through my book. How's it going? Although we're going through the introduction, we're almost done. And that'll probably be the stream. It'll be a little bit short one. But it's been a while. And then the practice here will be reframing. We can make decisions about what things mean to us and what is worth our attention. This is such a critical thing, I think, to do for people to do, that I think they don't consider often enough. They often just like consider, what do I think of XYZ thing? And here we can maybe talk about this. So most often people like consider what is correct and like what is the correct way of viewing things, but attention is a pie, right? You have it's a limited resource, and people often think, what do I think of this, or what is correct? But they very rarely ask themselves, of my attention pie, is the sliver that this is occupying, is this even worth me thinking about? Right? Or they often say, okay, this thing might be true. This might be true. But it's fundamentally not worth focusing on. Right? Or if we think of this or as an issue instead of an attention, like our attention pie, this thing could be true, but it could also not be worth focusing on because there's so much more here, and this is more worthy of consideration because it's so much more substantive. And instead, it's just like people go through this thing where it's just misemphasizing where they are placing their attention when they're just focusing too much on what's true or what they think is true, rather than what it is they should be focusing on entirely. So would the correct action be to let the child drown and sell my shoes and use that money to save multiple children in Yemen? Actually, that might be the better solution. The correct answer is you save the child. The thought experiment is supposed to be an absurd one, where you obviously save the child, and it's used as a metaphor to express what the situation is regarding children in Africa. But that is not only probably a better answer, it's also a funnier one. No, you let the child drown and you sell your Yeezys and you save 5 children instead. That's probably the better answer. That's funny. Yeah, to the Peter Singer thought experiment, which is you're going by a lake, child is drowning, do you save him? And ruin your $200 shoes. Your Yeezys, except Yeezys was the example I used for a long time, but now that like Kanye is like gone off the deep end, it's probably not as good an example. I think he got dropped, and like Yeezys maybe aren't a thing anymore. But okay, block 4 is talking about effective. Remember, we're breaking down attention, the definition, into 5 blocks. Attention is effective action in the direction of our values. So, effective. The problem here is performance. Often the things that we want are outside of our direct control, and we must have a way of bridging the gap between what we can control and what we want. This is something that's super fundamental in Stoicism, which is that you should only focus on things within your control, and everything outside of it you shouldn't focus on. And so the question is how do we focus on things within our control, because this makes us more effective as agents, but still simultaneously get something that seems far away? And this is the subject of this chapter. Sticking our heads in the sand of pure introspection is not an option. Yeah, we can't just only change our feelings about things. because that would be avoiding the agency itself. That would be the easier sort of solution, be like, well, we just stop caring about the thing, and instead we have to try and bridge the gap between what we care about and our own personal action. And the theory is embodiment. Not only does our mind influence our body, but our body influences our mind. While emotion is outside of our direct control, there are things we can do to influence it. Thank you for the follow, Limulian. Big nice. There are things we can do to influence it. Is that off-centered? Is my overlay off-centered? Like, overlay is kind of... My overlay is off-centered. There we go. Now my overlay is better, but nothing is visible in my overlay unless I'm looking at it. Alright. And the practice here is process orientation. By working backwards from our goals that are outside of our control, we can brainstorm and focus on a process that is within our control. It is on these processes that we ought to direct our attention and refine our practice. And then block 5, our values, which is the final block. The problem is motivation. When something is consistent with the various aspects of our identity, when we are aligned, motivation is easy. When it's not, we have to be strategic with our willpower. I might feel differently, a little bit differently about this chapter now than I did several years ago when I wrote it. The theory is identity. The roles and archetypes we perceive ourselves to occupy will not only inform motivation, but also inform the availability of these actions and the cognitive dissonance we experience. And so in this, I think I lean heavily on like stuff like the Zimbardo prison experiment, where Philip Zimbardo, Stanford professor, he separated students into being prison guards and prisoners, and then they ran a mock prison in the basement of Stanford, and very, very quickly into the experiment, the guards started abusing the prisoners, both psychologically and physically, and Zimbardo very mistakenly made himself the warden of the prison, so he kind of inserted himself into the experiment. When he was testing, the very thing he was testing was, does giving an identity like affect your behavior? And he gave himself this sort of identity, and he allowed it to go on too long. But the idea is that by just giving them a role to play, they embodied this role. And so what roles you perceive yourselves to embody is going to change what actions seem available to you. So by making themselves the prisoners or the prison guard, right, this informs what they think is available. Here, Stanford prison experiment. Was a psychological experiment conducted on August 1971. It was a 2-week simulation of a prison environment that examined the effects of situational variables. Let's scroll down to controversy. Or maybe we go through some of these. Guards referred to prisoners by their identification and confined them to small cells. At 2:30, the prisons rebelled against the guards. Wake-up calls against the guards is wake-up calls of whistles and clanging batons. So they're waking them up at 2:30 a.m. This is like not letting people sleep is like for no reason. Like, these guys didn't actually commit any crimes. Prisoners refused to leave their cells to eat in the yard, ripped off their inmate number tags, took stocking caps, and insulted the guards. In response, the guards sprayed fire extinguishers to reserve control. This is day 2 of a mock experiment where these people aren't actually in these roles. The 3 backup guards were called in to help regain control of the prison. Guards removed all the prisoners' clothes, removed the mattresses, and sentenced the main instigators to time in the hole. They attempted to dissuade any further rebellion using psychological warfare. One of the guards said to the other that these are dangerous prisoners. These are just students that underwent a psychology screening beforehand to make sure that they were completely level-headed. That experiment was wild for all the bad reasons. Yeah, the experiment was wild. That's not even, like, look, here's prisoner breaking down and crying. Uh, let's see. This is an example of Zimbardo misbehaving. Thursday, August 19th. The day was scheduled for visitations by friends, a family of the inmates, to stimulate the prison experience. Zimbardo and the guards made the visitors wait for long periods of time to see their loved ones. Only 2 of the visitors could see any one prisoner, and only for just 10 minutes while a guard watched. Parents grew concerned about their sons' well-being and whether they had enough to eat. Some parents left with plans to contact lawyers to gain early release of their children. On the same day, Zimbardo's colleague, Gordon H. didn't... The whole point of making them wait long periods to see their loved ones is actually to make the parents like more annoyed, so that they would be less receptive to the complaints of the students. This guy checked in on the experiment and questioned Zimbardo about what independent variables of the research was. Christina, who I think was his girlfriend at the time, also visited the prison that night and was distressed after observing the guards abusing the prisoners, forcing them to wear bags over their heads. She challenged Zimbardo about his lack of caring and oversight and immorality of the study. Finally, she made evident that Zimbardo had been changed by his role as superintendent into someone she did not recognize and did not like. And the fundamental thing here is, look, the feeling of this role is like what made Zimbardo act this way. And so if our roles are going to affect us so much, which is what this experiment suggests, and here they end the experiment. It was supposed to go 2 weeks, and it only went 6 days. But the idea is the role that they perceive themselves to occupy facilitated all of this. And I think I talk about Abu Ghraib as well in the book. But practice is values and intention. We can organize our values into a hierarchy so that we can clarify what's important. So this is we're organizing it into a hierarchy for practical reasons. Further, we can choose to change our hierarchy values to support either our highest value or our own personal story. Now, in this, I would probably need to reorganize this a little bit, but I think that there's like kind of several aspects of kind of a very similar thing, which is the values, what's important to you, the roles you perceive yourself to occupy, your identity, what your perceived identity is. All of these overlap a tremendous amount, and your own personal story you have for yourself. So these 4 things all have an incredible amount of overlap, and I think I try and like delineate these in like very clear ways. And I think now that it's a little bit more murky, that like your story is necessarily separated from the roles you perceive yourself to occupy, or the story, like the story you tell yourself about your life and who you are. And your identity, a lot of people's identities are deeply tied up in the roles that they perceive themselves to occupy, rather than like let's say their values. And there's an experiment where you take a like basically a nearly blank sheet of paper, you provide it to the students or whoever's taking the study or the test or whatever, and it just says I am, and then followed by a blank space, and the person has to fill in the I am blank like 25 times. And the whole point of it is to take a look at how individualistic they are versus how socially oriented they are. So you can write I am intelligent, I am handsome, I am good at Victoria 3. You can write all these like individualistic things, or you can write, I am a mother, I am a friend, I am a brother. You can write stuff that's socially oriented. I am a teammate, I am a football player, or something like this. And although player, I don't know if that's individualistic, or I'm on a football team would be social, but I don't know if football players considered individuals. Anyways, the point is that the idea of the experiment, or the reason you run the test, is to see how socially versus individualistically oriented people are. And so the more individualistically oriented you are, the more your values are going to inform your identity, and the more socially oriented you are, the more your roles are going to inform your identity. Okay. Getting close to the end here. How to use this book. The easiest way to understand how this book is structured is to think of the task we're engaged in as one of building a bridge from what we have control over, our attention, to that which we desire, action towards our values, or even external manifestations of those values. So the book starts with a very humble position, which is the only thing we can control is our attention, and it tries to bridge this gap between that and wanting to be able to control much, much more. You'll notice that I'll usually use the word we instead of you or I. This is something I intentionally did with like streaming and making content as well, to refer to the active and interested party throughout this book. This is intentional. We isn't normally my style. It wasn't my style at the time. It's become my style. I find the personal I as well as the abstract and neutral one more natural. The reason I use we is that I think that this bridge building process is a collaborative effort. Agency is a performance, not just a state. So to be an agent is to be active, to live actively, which surely includes the active participation in reading. So the notion that the author is the only active party in this exchange is inconsistent with the ideas we'll be discussing. Beyond that, agency is a practice, and just because I have assembled and organized these ideas does not absolve me of a responsibility to refine that practice and act with intentionality. So when I offer a prescription of something we ought to do, if we're to actualize our values, I include myself amongst those to whom I'm speaking, which is now ironic because I'm reading this many years later. The exercise part of mental exercise certainly applies some degree of struggle. The metaphor for physical exercise, where a physical stimulus and struggle is required for physical adaptation, is not lost on me. There is research, looking for it from the book Range, I don't know exactly what page, that suggests that struggling with an idea is better for really understanding it rather than merely receiving some sort of simplified heuristic for memorizing the answer. Further, there's some evidence to suggest that being challenged is a necessary component of satisfaction. This is from Gregory Burns, neuroscientist. So the degree to which those exercises, we maybe... Here, footnote. We want to cite Burns there. So the degree to the exercise that might be difficult or require active and attentive engagement, so much the better. In this book, we'll explore the idea of predecision, specifically that by committing to some sort of behavior ahead of time, we make it more likely we'll actualize that behavior. Though it's certainly recommended, I'll not ask you to do all the exercises, but I will ask that you'll consider doing each of them. That you attend to the idea of doing them as you read through them in the book. To that end, there will only be 2 times I ask you to deface this book. This is one of them. I might exclude this, but this is one of them. I ask that you sign the line below as an embodied way of demonstrating your commitment to doing the exercises that you read in the book. Commitment to considering doing the exercises that you read in the book. I don't know if I'd want to still include this, but there was this one book called Rip It Up, which part of the reading of the book involves you tearing off the pages. And one of the pages is actually pinned to my wall. And it's crumpled up. It's pinned to my wall. And the whole idea was that we cannot resist peeking at something if we really, really want to know. I forget the exact context at this point. It's been a while. But I never peeked. The crumpled up piece of paper is still pinned to my wall. And it's a reminder of a little willpower game that was in that book. But if you like write an idea of if you write a bunch of things that are negative about yourself, or what was the exercise in that book? I think it was like if you write a bunch of things that are negative about yourself on a piece of paper, and then you rip up that piece of paper, that actually has like a substantive effect. Like the symbolic act of ripping up the paper is effective. And this was one of the things that the book points out, is that stuff is very embodied and not just abstract and theoretical. And so that is why I have in here like a little bit of an appeal to that book. And I think that one of the later things is I ask the person to rip up the page, just like Rip It Up. if I recall correctly. And this is the last paragraph here. So we'll probably be ending soon. Unless people want to chat or ask questions. As we understand agency so far, one component is volitional control. One must be consciously aware of their hand in causing the action. So if we are to, as agents, engage in an action, we must be aware of that action. We want our actions, this is actually going to be like a summary of this, I think. The breaking it up into 5 parts. So let's start back over. As we understand agency so far, one part is volitional control. One must be consciously aware of their hand in causing the action. So if we are to, as agents, to engage in an action, we must be aware of that action. This is like, I guess maybe this isn't like a summary of the ones below, but this is such an important point. Like, if you took like a botanist, and I think I use this metaphor later in the book, if you take a botanist and geologist to a waterfall, right, they will have a vastly different experience enter a waterfall in the jungle, a vastly different experience of what is relevant enter their attention. Like the biologist will see all the fauna, all the flora. The fauna is the other stuff. And the geologist would be more focused on the nature of like the rushing water and the sediment and this type of stuff. And the types of actions that would enter their mind that would be necessary for survival would be wildly different. Like the geologist might be focused on like the way the water is running such that it provides clean water, and the botanist might be focused on, hey, what if this is edible and this type of stuff. And they will both have, if their goal was to survive and they're just like dropped at this waterfall, they both will have different actions entering their attention as a result of their experience and knowledge. And the botanist might not even think about clean running water, and so the notion of procuring clean running water to survive better might not even enter their attention. And so they obviously can't do it if they don't think about it. And the geologist, well, they might think, they'll probably get hungry and think about food, but they have no idea how to evaluate, which food is safe for this type of thing. We want our actions to be more than just our own. We want them to be effective and in the right direction. This means that we need the actions that fit those criteria to enter our attention before we take them. So if something's like really effective towards getting what you want, but you never think of it, then you can't choose to do it. For that, we need to unpack our most important concept, attention. So this is a prelude to the next chapter. And I think we're going to stop there. I don't think we're going to read through the whole, like, a whole nother chapter, because that chapter is going to be quite long and would require another session. But if anyone, I think I'll hang out for a couple minutes and answer any questions anyone has, because we just kind of ran through the introduction. But other than that, we'll probably pack it up. And so I'll just stick around for a couple minutes if anyone has anything. I guess we can go back over to this. And I was super proud of breaking this up into like 5 blocks and then defining it. When I wrote the book, or we wrote the book. When's the next session? I'm thinking that's a good question. I'm thinking that I will do an ideas session every Sunday, and so if I don't have something necessarily planned, I think I will go through it the next portion next Sunday. If there wasn't something I wanted to cover. I wanted to do a presentation on ethics, though. So let's see if I can get this into the frame. I have an arm for a top-down camera because I wanted to be able to write stuff on my desk and show it off. But this camera is not very good, and I don't know, for whatever reason, either OBS or my computer doesn't like the top-down camera or adding a second camera very much. And so I can't use both the cameras simultaneously, which is what I would want to do. But even if I think I could do a top-down setup, I would want to explain ideas and write stuff down like that, generally speaking. But even if I could, this camera is like not good enough. I need to get a nicer camera to maybe get that setup working. So if I don't get that setup working, probably next. I missed a space in 2 neuroplasticity. Oh wow. Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Richard. And so I was thinking we'd do it another one, and that would be the subject of attention. I think for a long time I've not wanted to report on this because I did want to publish it, and to some extent I still want to publish it, but now I'm thinking that I just cannibalize this for content. I still think that the theory and all this stuff is correct, and I mean I could still publish it after putting it up. This is also still a rough draft. Like I definitely change this quote. I think the Marx quote's not like it fits, but it's like to have this be the opening salvo of your book, like it implies too much. I don't think I want to quote Marx at the beginning of a book on personal agency rather than like social change. Yeah. The problem of attention, then the theory is neuroplasticity, then the practice is mental exercise. This is the fundamental base of the book. Problems of the unknown, mental models, practice is brainstorming. And here I tried to set out like 4 different types of mental exercise as well. So introducing the concept of mental exercise, but here brainstorming as the first concept, reframing as another, process orientation as another, although this is more a structuring of our mental exercise, and then values and intention, just providing a further guiding light. Is it consider it an agent or is it consider it an agent or consider to be active in an activity if a delegate part of the active work? For example, if you delegated the work. Well, I think that your delegation is like where your agency is, but you're not an agent for the other person's task, and you can't be responsible for how they complete the task, but you could be responsible for replacing them or trying to get them replaced if they can't engage in their task. And so there's a little bit going on there where and the notion of replacing them, this might be something that doesn't necessarily enter your attention or does enter your attention, but this process orientation definitely is an orientation towards stoicism, in the sense of and stoicism maybe I don't even want to lean on anymore. I think like it kind of is distorted in a lot of modern perspectives where the focus is on being cold towards others or something like this, and that's not the thing, but just focus on what you can control. And you can focus on, like, if you're delegating to someone else, you can focus on the nature of your delegation or who you delegate towards, but ultimately part of it's going to be outside your control. I think social change starts with individual action, though. I agree, Richard, but that's like outside the scope of the book. So to the extent social action would be inside the scope of the book, it would be like where we are thinking of how we can plan backwards from something we want towards our own individual action. And so like the ideas are applicable, but we're not like, this isn't a book on how to create social change as much. But what you would do is you'd be like, okay, what's the change in society you want? And then work your way backwards from that until you eventually get to the individual actions you can take. And the truth is that society just as a whole just is this large thing with a lot of momentum. So you can only shift it a little bit. And so, but if enough people are shifting it a little bit, then you move it. And so it's really about organizing people and like creating social change. There's this book called by The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, which introduces this idea of, or he talks about this idea of mavens, that the people who really cause ideas to spread or catch on are people who are, like, let's say I write a book. Well, I wrote a book, but let's say I publish a book. The way the book actually spreads a lot is not so much based on the quality of the book, but it's about hitting this particular tipping point where the momentum of the book starts carrying itself. And one thing that's very critical of this, for the law of the few might be what he's talking about. Or is this the 80-20 principles? 80% of the work is done by 20% of the participants. Okay, so this might be it. But he introduces this idea of mavens. Okay, this is it actually here. Mavens are information specialists, or people who we rely upon to connect with new information. They accumulate knowledge, especially about the marketplace, and know how to share it with others. Gladwell cites Mark Alpert as the prototypical maven who is almost pathologically helpful, further adding he can't help himself. In this vein, Alpert concedes a maven is someone who wants to solve other people's problems, generally by solving his own. According to Gladwell, mavens start word-of-mouth epidemics, and this is the critical thing. They start word-of-mouth epidemics due to their knowledge, social skills, and ability to communicate. Mavens are really information brokers, sharing and trading what they know. And so a huge part of an idea spreading, Gladwell's like 80-20 principle, is done by these, information specialists who other people rely on for information. And so the way you would create social change is by trying to figure out, how do I get the people who other people trust for information to care about this thing, which is like a difficult task, and like is outside the context of like personal agency, because we're deeply now concerned with how ideas spread and getting more people involved, because social change requires like this changing the direction of this huge beast when you yourself have very little resources. Hello, you wrote your own book? That's great. Yeah, we did write our own book. This is the intro to the book. It's about self-improvement psychology. It starts off more philosophical about the nature of agency and also, to some extent, free will. And then it blends into being more self-help and psychology-oriented. And it's sort of building a bridge from a very basic type of creation of the notion of agency, and building from this very small starting point where the only thing we can control is our attention, and try and build that into more complex actions through largely leaning on psychology. I was thinking that if you need to be in the scope of things that if you need to be there, the scope of things that interest you is really small. Compared that if you consider a delegation as an active stand, it allow you to consider a matter as a global. I was thinking that if you need to be there, the scope of interest you are really small. Compare that if you consider delegation, and you can consider it more global. Well, so the problem is ultimately what your control is really small, and that's like the nature of the thing. However, it does include your social connections. But if someone who you think is capable of a task, and you delegate that task to them, can't perform the task, that's just how it goes sometimes. And you shouldn't fret too much over that, except in a few ways, which is that you could say, hey, I'm not very good at evaluating, this thing, or I'm not very good at evaluating who is capable of doing this, apparently. And so you could try and update your map of what type of person is good for this. And Ray Dalio's Principles is an interesting book for this. here, let's show his website instead of Amazon. So this book here, in it he talks about iterative action and also forming heuristics. And so if someone fails at a task, what you can do from your personal control is try and ask, hey, why did they fail at this task? And an example of how Ray Dalio does it, or talks about doing it in his book and talking about management, is like he has like an inventory of characteristics that he has for all of his employees, and he measures and rates them on those characteristics. And what he has discovered is that certain characteristics are conducive to being able to do certain tasks. And it's through this iterative process of, you know, figuring out what characteristics we're going to create or even observe, how we're going to measure them, and then correlate them with the ability to get stuff done in a particular task. And through that, you can, you know, create a process by which you can better delegate. And so it's not that you have zero control, but what you have control over is this narrow band. So you have to try and work your way back to something. And I think Ray Dalio's principles is an interesting example of that. I think he misses the mark in some places, but I think that in terms of looking at action through iterative processes, I think his book Principles is really interesting. But the nature of building backwards from a specific goal that you want, this is kind of at the end of the book. You know, and is would be a new book, like I think, if you wanted to talk about how to create social change, which also is, I think something I'm not as well informed on, but yeah. Anyways, I think we will be wrapping it up then, because I've cleared the chat. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. This has been, you know, this is going to be, for me, an interesting experiment. I am uncertain how much of this will do. This is my first stream that is done on my Ideas channel of the YouTube, so nice seeing all you guys here on the YouTube. I'm assuming you're coming more from the Discord, but this is, you know, trying to be more general, and so we're probably going to try and have at least one stream per week for each of the YouTubes. The Ideas one, the Strength one, and the Gaming one, of course. And this is this might be kind of our go-to if I don't know what we're going to be doing, which is reading through a chapter of my book. I also want to reread my book, because I think it's actually going to be useful for me, because I think that when I was the most like dialed in was probably when I was writing this book. Which is an interesting thing, where you're writing a book on agency and how to get yourself to engage in effective action. And while doing that, I was definitely getting myself to engage in effective action. The notion of writing a 70,000 word book would have been very outside my reality before this. I think the longest thing I wrote before this was like 2,500 words, or like 5,000 words or something like this. And it popped up on your front page, Richard. That's interesting. This is because this is the first stream I've done of this. But yeah, this is easily like more than 10x the longest thing I've ever written. This entire thing, which this is just the intro. It's like 12 chapters. So we could get through it in 3 months if this is the only thing we stream, and we stream it every Sunday, which maybe we'll do, depending on what people are interested in. I suppose I could run a poll, but I don't think I'll get much engagement on the poll on the YouTube. But yeah. Alright, so I think we'll just end the stream. How many people do we have on Twitch? If we have a lot on Twitch, we'll just raid someone who's playing. We'll raid T90 on Twitch. Who plays Age of Empires 2, and he's casting a game. He's just shoutcasting it, and he's one of the content creators I follow, so we'll be rating him on the Twitch. And to the YouTube people, I say, Godspeed. And we will be on our way. Thank you guys for showing up.